In the dying years of the 16th century, the British caravel Mersey departed the gray waters of Plymouth Harbor with a singular purpose: to chart a swifter passage across the Atlantic. Her crew were seasoned, hardened men who knew the temperament of deep water and respected its moods. Nothing in their orders suggested the voyage would deviate from the ordinary. Yet somewhere in the vast emptiness south of the established shipping lanes, the ocean itself seemed to transform. The water grew unseasonably warm. All marine life vanished as though fleeing some unseen terror. The surface became unnaturally still and dark as polished obsidian, and the hull began receiving deliberate, measured strikes from beneath, impacts that felt disturbingly purposeful. The men swore an oath amongst themselves that they were being assessed, studied even, by something that natural philosophy insisted could not exist in their modern age. So, before we continue, please make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks to I served aboard the caravel Mersey sailing out of Plymouth in the year when frost lingered stubbornly upon the fields well into spring and summer arrived, riding a fierce, unrelenting wind. The vessel herself measured scarcely more than 20 paces from stem to stern, rigged with a square forecourse and a lateen sail mounted upon the mizzenmast. Our provisions were typical of such expeditions: barrels of rye hardtack biscuit that could break teeth if one weren't careful, salt beef preserved in brine so strong it burned the tongue, dried peas that required extensive soaking, and water that turned brackish and foul-tasting within mere days of leaving port. Our orders came directly from the Plymouth Merchants Consortium. We were to trial a faster route across the Atlantic by sailing southward to the latitude of the Azores, then proceeding westward with the prevailing trade winds until we turned northwards again for soundings off the American coast. The captain, Edward Aldridge, was a man who harbored ambitions of immortality. He desired his name inscribed upon nautical charts, credited with shortening the Atlantic crossing by precious days. I served as the ship's clerk and keeper of the log and instrument chest. I had completed 2 previous voyages and possessed both sound teeth and a steady hand with a quill, qualifications that counted for considerably more than eloquence of speech aboard ship. Our complement was deliberately small, and each man carefully selected for competence. Master Thomas Hargreaves served as our navigator and astronomical observer. He calculated our noon position with his astrolabe and performed dead reckoning calculations each dawn. He trusted his mathematical computations absolutely and did not welcome debate or second-guessing of his figures. Owen Price had previously hunted whales from Biscayan boats and bore vicious scars along both forearms where a harpoon line had caught and stripped flesh clean down to the muscle beneath. He carried his own hand-forged harpoon and sharpened it meticulously each evening beside the foremast, more from ingrained habit than any explicit orders. Young Ned Tripp was but 14 years of age, quick and agile with blocks and running lines, and he consciously attempted to mimic the rolling gait of the older sailors. Parson Whitlow kept a small leather-bound Bible wrapped carefully in oilskin and led prayers at sunset each evening without fail. The ship's surgeon, a taciturn man named Bull, kept his surgical knives wrapped in clean linen and drank sparingly. When Captain Aldridge walked the deck during the night watches, I observed him repeatedly rubbing the small of his back with his thumb as though it pained him considerably. He believed no one noticed this gesture of discomfort. We cleared Ushant with a strong beam reach and a gray, choppy sea typical of those waters. The wind held steady and true for 2 full days and nights before gradually dying away to nothing. The Bay of Biscay presented us with a slow, regular swell that lifted and lowered the hull without pause in a rhythm that became almost hypnotic. Pitch began oozing from the deck seams in the afternoon warmth. The rigging creaked with a steady, predictable rhythm. Rats emerged from the hold after darkness fell, and young Ned chased them enthusiastically with a length of rope, more for sport than genuine pest control. By the 5th day at sea, we achieved a clean sun sight at noon, and Master Hargreaves declared our position and heading to be precisely as planned. A pot of porpoises appeared and raced alongside our bow, and Owen laughed heartily and requested a handspike to attempt spearing one. The captain refused permission, He wanted speed and progress, not bloodsport or unnecessary diversions. The initial change was subtle enough to dismiss as coincidence. The water temperature rose dramatically over the course of mere hours without any corresponding change in wind direction or strength. When I lowered a bucket on a line to draw water, the wooden staves felt distinctly warm against my palms, almost uncomfortable. An unusual smell emanated from the water. Not the typical clean brine scent, but something sharper, more metallic, as though the sea itself had taken on the taste of old iron. Parson Whitlow suggested we had merely sailed into a pocket of warmer water, a phenomenon known to occur in these latitudes. Hargreaves agreed with this assessment and consulted the sun once more as though seeking celestial confirmation of his reasoning. That evening, the sea lost its characteristic surface texture entirely. The usual ripples and minor chop vanished, replaced by long, smooth rolls without any breaking crests or white foam. The wake trailing behind our stern smoothed almost immediately after our passage, as though the water possessed unusual viscosity. I recorded this observation in the ship's log because I had never witnessed such a phenomenon in my previous voyages. 2 days subsequently, the seabirds ceased appearing. In the Channel and throughout the Bay of Biscay, gulls and other maritime birds typically followed ships with reliable persistence, arriving and departing with the winds, but always maintaining some presence, particularly at dawn. On this particular day, the sky remained utterly empty of avian life from sunrise to sunset. Young Ned said nothing until noon, then stood gripping the shrouds and scanning the horizon as though expecting to sight land or some other explanation for this absence. Owen told him gruffly not to invoke ill fortune by speaking aloud of such things. The captain stated with deliberate casualness that we were now far from any coastline and birds had no particular business following us at such distance from land. He spoke with a studied flatness in his voice, and I noticed him pulling once more at the small of his back as though the mysterious pain had intensified. The third anomaly was auditory. Initially, I perceived it through the hull timbers when I leaned close to the scuppers whilst rinsing a cooking pan. It was neither thunder nor the crack of wood. Rather, it was a deep, resonant knock, spaced irregularly as though some massive object were deliberately striking the ship's hull from a distance. No one spoke of it until evening because a single man hearing something strange can easily be mistaken or imagining threats. When the second watch took their positions on deck, the sound came again with greater clarity and force, and this time the deck planks transmitted the vibration directly through our boots. Owen raised his head sharply and stared into the dark water without uttering a word. Parson Whitlow began to speak, then visibly stopped himself and clenched his jaw. The captain ordered me to make detailed written records, and I complied immediately. I noted the precise times and counted the number of distinct knocks. 3 occurred during the first hour, 2 during the second, then silence for an extended period. Throughout this, the wind remained constant and our speed showed no diminution. The sound simply occurred without apparent cause. The fourth change arrived with the morning light and could not be dismissed or rationalized. A dead pilot whale floated motionless on our starboard beam, its skin torn in 2 parallel strips running from the neck region down to the dorsal ridge. The edges of these wounds were clean and precise, not ragged as one would expect from scavenger predation, and remarkably, no seabirds or other scavengers were working at the exposed flesh. The meat beneath the stripped skin appeared pale and strangely compressed. Owen balanced himself upon the rail and examined it at length without speaking. Finally, he stated simply that no boat hook was to touch the carcass under any circumstances. The captain concurred with this judgment and ordered the helm to give the floating body a wide berth. We watched it recede astern, and I observed that the belly cavity had not been opened or violated. Whatever had killed this creature had stopped after removing only the skin and surface blubber, leaving the remainder untouched. Surgeon Bull recorded it clinically as a curiosity and retreated below decks. Nothing of note occurred at the noon observation. Hargreaves called out our latitude, and the captain acknowledged it with a nod. We consumed our rations of hardtack biscuit and peas and drank water that tasted strongly of the barrel's wood. Young Ned asked me what I wrote in the log when nothing eventful occurred. I told him truthfully that I wrote nothing during such periods and thus conserved ink. He smiled at this pragmatic approach and then returned his gaze to the waters beyond the rail once more. The light faded prematurely that day. A bank of dark cloud rose in the western sky and swept across the sun, though notably the wind direction remained unchanged. The sea surface lost additional definition until it appeared almost glassy, and I could see our ship's reflection in it when I leaned outboard by the chains. The reflection was not sharp or clear. The hull created a darker shape beneath the waterline, and beyond that shape there existed only impenetrable darkness. When I lowered the lead line for depth soundings, it descended without touching bottom for 150 fathoms, then continued falling. The line drifted gradually southward as though caught by some slow, deep current. I called out the depth, or rather, the lack of any bottom, and the drift direction, and Hargreaves recorded these figures. He frowned deeply and started to articulate something, then stopped himself mid-thought. At dusk, we hung the stern lantern as was customary. The flame cast a small, weak circle of illumination upon our wake and created a pale wash of light upon the lower portion of the mizzenmast. Men typically speak more freely during this transitional hour between day and night, or else fall completely silent. On this particular evening, they instinctively gathered close to one another, and even young Ned ceased his usual rat-hunting activities. Owen sat upon the forward hatch with his harpoon laid across his knees, the metal looking dull in the fading light. He rubbed it methodically with an oil-soaked cloth. Near midnight, the hull suddenly lurched without any corresponding change in wind strength or sea state. It was a single, powerful shove from directly below and slightly to port. The yard creaked ominously, then steadied. Every man froze in position, afraid even to breathe. The captain emerged from his cabin and stated simply, "Hands remain still." The shove came a second time with greater force. The hull shifted perceptibly to starboard, and the water made a heavy slapping sound against the planking. The lantern swung wildly and threw distorted shadows across the deck. I felt the impact resonate through my teeth and jawbone. Hargreaves moved quickly to the rail and leaned far out, searching the black water. He saw nothing but darkness. The third impact struck the keel directly amidships. It lifted the bow noticeably and then set it down again. The mast shook violently. The shrouds hummed with transferred vibration. Owen stood upright. "That is not driftwood," he declared with certainty. "That comes with intention." He spoke with such steady conviction that the other men found their breath returning. The simple act of naming the threat as deliberate somehow made it more bearable than an unknown force. The captain ordered "stand by," and we positioned additional men at the braces in case of sudden wind requiring sail adjustments. None came. We waited tensely. Half an hour passed without sound or further impacts. The sea remained unnaturally smooth. Hargreaves tapped the compass box and waited for the needle to stabilize. It hung 2 points off true north momentarily, then corrected itself to the proper heading. He said nothing and carefully closed the brass lid. At dawn, we discovered physical evidence that could not be ignored or explained away. The ship's carpenter, a meticulous man named Sutter, went over the side in a bosun's chair with a mallet secured to his belt. He ran his hands methodically over the hull planks and called up descriptions of what he felt. Long, shallow grooves in 2 distinct locations, deeper scraping marks in another section, and most disturbing, a round hole approximately the size of a man's fist where the pitch caulking had been torn completely free of the seam. He discovered a splinter of hard, white material wedged firmly in the edge of one of the grooves. We hauled him back aboard, and he placed the fragment upon the deck for examination. It resembled a piece of tooth, heavy, dense, and smooth, with a faint grain running longitudinally in one direction. Surgeon Bowl picked it up and pressed his thumb against it with considerable force. The material did not yield or compress in the slightest. Owen Price stared at it in silence for an extended period, then stated quietly, "It fed here upon the pitch and tar. It tasted our ship." The day grew oppressively hot, without any weight or humidity in the air. The wind decreased to almost nothing. We drifted more than we actively sailed. The men spoke only when directly addressed or required to do so by their duties. Young Ned scrubbed the deck with sand and seawater until the planks showed their natural wood grain clearly. He repeatedly glanced toward the bow where Sutter had examined the mysterious damage. The captain paced in tight circles and continued rubbing his troublesome back. Hargreaves took the noon sun sight and performed lengthy calculations that concluded with a subtle frown of concern. By late afternoon, the water appeared to darken beneath our keel. The change was not caused by cloud cover or failing light. It originated from below, from the depths themselves. Standing at the rail, I observed a hazy mass in the deep water that moved slowly across our course. It was not a cloud of suspended silt or sediment. It moved with definite, coherent edges. I called Owen to witness it. He leaned far out and stared downward in complete silence. The shape passed directly beneath our hull and extended beyond the starboard beam. It maintained cohesion for some time, then gradually dispersed. We could not accurately measure its length, but it clearly exceeded our own ship's dimensions. At sunset, we reefed the sails conservatively and established a watch with explicit orders to strike the ship's bell immediately upon any knock or lurch. Parson Whitlow requested permission to speak the evening prayer. The captain nodded consent. We stood with heads bowed respectfully and listened to his words. The prayer was unusually brief. When he concluded, the sea produced a single, heavy thud directly beneath the stern, and the bell rang spontaneously where it hung beside the helm. Not a man moved or spoke. Night descended without stars because the cloud cover persisted. The circle of lantern light upon our wake appeared smaller and more fragile than previously. The carpenter checked the bilges for leaks and found none. The surgeon laid out clean cloth and fresh water beside the mainmast and stated it was merely prudent preparation. The captain made no response. He stood by the taffrail and watched the dark water intently. Toward the middle of the night watch, the sea parted ahead of our bow without any wind to explain it, and a swell approached us from the darkness. It was not a wave with a breaking crest. Rather, it was a lifting force that traveled beneath us and bent the hull structure itself. The mast leaned backwards noticeably and then returned to vertical. The bell sounded again of its own accord. Owen gripped his harpoon tightly. He stared into the black water without blinking, his entire body tense and ready. At first light, the captain assembled all hands and assigned tasks without commenting upon the disturbing events of the night. He ordered Sutter to nail additional reinforcing battens over the worst of the hull grooves and to pack all seams doubly with oakum and pitch. He instructed me to maintain the ship's log at quarter-hour intervals rather than hourly. He told Owen to lay out every harpoon and hand iron we possessed and to coil 3 separate lines near the foremast. Hargreaves checked the compass once more, then took his slate and calculated a new course that favored more southerly waters. He offered no explanation for this course change, but the captain approved it immediately. I felt a persistent tightness in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger or seasickness. I desperately wanted to see the sun at its zenith and the sea behaving in its accustomed manner. The feeling did not diminish throughout the day. We attempted to make better speed, but the sails hung nearly flat. The sea remained level and completely without chop. The crew's footsteps sounded unnaturally loud upon the planking. Surgeon Bull requested a measure of vinegar to rinse his bandage cloths. He stated he wanted medical supplies readily at hand. I fetched it and placed it beside the mainmast. He glanced toward the stern and kept his hands perfectly still, betraying no emotion. By mid-morning, the metallic smell from the water intensified considerably. It carried a sour undertone reminiscent of stale blood and old iron. Young Ned called out from his position in the bow. I went forward immediately with Owen close behind. A long strip of hide floated upon the surface, approximately the length of a tall man. It appeared to be skinned from some enormous fish, pale on one side and darker on the other, with small pits or pores where hair follicles would be on a seal's pelt, but significantly larger and more widely spaced. The cut edge revealed fat and cleanly severed layers of tissue. Owen prodded it carefully with a boat hook. The material was thick and remarkably dense. He did not bring it aboard. He let it slide away astern and meticulously wiped the boat hook with an oily rag. He did not speak until the piece had fallen far behind us. Then he stated grimly, "It feeds near our position. It sheds that quantity of hide without the slightest concern." At noon, Hargreaves completed the sun's sight. His calculations were unusually brief. He closed the astrolabe case and stood motionless for a full minute before recording his numbers. The captain asked him for the course heading he recommended. Hargreaves tapped a location on the chart farther south than our current position. 1 degree, he specified. The captain gave the order without hesitation. We adjusted the braces and eased the helm to maintain the new heading. The ship responded, but sluggishly and with obvious reluctance. The afternoon brought a deliberate test of our adversary's capabilities. Owen requested permission to attempt baiting whatever stalked us. The captain regarded him steadily and gave a small, grave nod of approval. Owen selected a quarter section of salt beef from the provisions barrel, wrapped it securely with line, and fixed the end through the iron ring of a sturdy cask. He paid it out astern approximately 12 fathoms and made the line fast to a substantial bit. The meat dragged in our wake whilst the cask bumped along behind it. The men assembled along the rail without jests or idle conversation, barely breathing. We waited with mounting tension. The strike came without any warning whatsoever. The line snapped violently taut, and the bit groaned ominously under the sudden strain. The cask skipped once across the surface and then submerged instantly, pulled down as though weighted with stone. The ship's forward motion slowed dramatically as though held by some enormous sea anchor. The line generated a thin wisp of smoke where it crossed the wooden rail under extreme friction. Sutter hastily poured seawater upon it to prevent the wood catching fire. The immense strain lasted approximately 10 breaths, then suddenly released. The line went completely slack. The cask shot upward violently, struck the surface on its side, and rolled over. It bore deep gouges along 2 of its wooden staves, each mark perfectly even, with spacing that suggested enormous teeth. One end of the cask was staved in, not crushed by blunt force, but split cleanly by a single, focused impact. Owen hauled it aboard with Ned's assistance and that of 2 other men. He placed his finger into one of the grooves and pressed until his fingernail bent under the pressure. The wood had not splintered along its natural grain. The groove cut cleanly across the grain structure, an impossibility for any natural force we knew. Owen stated to no one in particular, "This jaw possesses more reach than an entire longboat. This is beyond any whale." We positioned the ruined cask beside the mainmast. Surgeon Bowl touched the marks carefully, then turned his hand over and pressed the back of his knuckles into the grooves to gauge their size. He examined the splintered end, then looked meaningfully at the tooth fragment Sutter had recovered earlier, which I had wrapped and secured in the instrument chest. Bowl requested it. I retrieved it immediately. He held the fragment against a groove in the cask wood. The curve matched with disturbing precision, well enough to arrest all conversation for a prolonged moment. Parson Whitlow spoke into this silence, his voice trembling slightly. He stated he had seen such fossilized objects in a gentleman's cabinet of curiosities in Exeter, called tongue stones by the elderly local man, and a visiting scholar had identified them as teeth from a species of enormous shark that existed in ancient geological periods. The parson's voice shook noticeably when he pronounced the word teeth. Hargreaves stated flatly, "If this creature is indeed that species, it lives in the present day, not in ancient history." The sky dimmed toward evening, though the cloud cover thinned somewhat. With the onset of darkness, a faint luminescence began manifesting in the water. Not bright, but sufficient that a hand dipped below the surface and moved would leave a pale, glowing trace. I had witnessed such bioluminescent phenomena previously in warmer tropical waters. On this particular night, however, the glow revealed more than merely our hull's outline. It revealed a shape below us, a long shadow moving with steady, deliberate turns. Each turn created two streaks of displaced luminescence where the edges cut through the water. The shape circled once and faded, then reappeared at a wider radius. Young Ned gripped the rail with both hands, his knuckles white. No one told him to release his grip. Owen fetched his harpoon. He stood ready with a weapon, but he kept his arm close to his body and did not display the iron point overtly, as though fearful of provoking an attack. The first strike upon our steering mechanism came at the change of watch. The helm jerked violently in Willis's hands and kicked twice as though shoved powerfully from the rudder below. The tiller rope creaked dangerously, and the securing pins rang in their holes with the transferred force. Willis called out in alarm. The captain reached him in 3 rapid strides and took the tiller bar with him. The stern dipped noticeably. A heavy, resonant thud rose through the deck planks. Then a scraping sound began along the lower stern post, slow and rough, as though some hard surface pressed against the wood and moved deliberately along it. Sutter and I ran aft with a lantern and leaned far over the taffrail. We glimpsed a pale plane beneath the water, broad and flat, pass under the counter and vanish into darkness. The scraping ceased. The helm answered again, but felt distinctly unresponsive, lacking its usual precision. "It has damaged the rudder," Sutter reported. "May have bent the gudgeon assembly." The captain nodded once, his expression grim. "We shall attempt to steer using sail trim," he stated. He spoke without apparent emotion, but I heard the weight and concern underlying his words. We rigged additional braces to enable steering via adjustment of the sheets should the helm lose further functionality. The second strike arrived rapidly. It hit the stern more squarely and drove the bow off course by 3 compass points. The lantern swung wildly and crashed against the taffrail. Willis swore explosively, then caught himself. Ned stumbled and struck his shoulder hard against a belaying pin. He bit his lip to suppress any cry and remained upright through visible effort. The captain ordered the aftermost sail eased to assist turning back to course. The ship responded, but with significant delay. The water behind us churned violently, then went flat once more. No dorsal fin cut the surface. Only the dim bioluminescence in the sea revealed a blurred shape moving to starboard and dropping back. The third strike threw a man overboard. It came not at the stern, but along the port side, just forward of the mainmast. The hull lurched violently, and a sheet block jumped from its securing pin. Ned had just run past with a coil of rope, and the sudden movement took his feet completely. He went to the rail, struck it with one side of his body, and tipped over into the dark water. I reached out desperately and caught only air. He vanished without uttering a sound. The water glowed where he went in. I saw his shape just beneath the surface, arms spread wide in shock. The crew froze for half a breath. Then Owen threw a line with extraordinary speed and accuracy. The coil fell precisely where needed. Ned's hand found it and closed around it desperately. The line jerked taut. A darker mass slid beneath him from bow to stern, easily twice the width of a man. A massive tail moved once and stirred a visible path of luminescent light. The mass rolled slightly and showed a pale underside, then sank deeper. We hauled with all our strength. Ned came up with both hands locked around the rope and his face gray as ash. He cleared the rail and collapsed upon the deck. His left calf bled from 2 long cuts, clean and relatively shallow. Not a bite, but rather he had struck some rough surface. Surgeon Bull bound the wounds with swift, practiced hands. Ned did not look back over the side. He stared fixedly at the mast and swallowed repeatedly, fighting shock. I felt profound relief wash over me, as though I had been holding my breath since the moment he fell. The crew began speaking in short, urgent bursts now. Willis reported the helm felt fundamentally wrong at center position. Sutter stated he would go over the stern at first light to inspect the damage if sea conditions permitted. The captain agreed and ordered us to extinguish the lantern at the taffrail and set two smaller lanterns forward instead, changing the pattern of light in our wake. He instructed Owen to keep the harpoons readily accessible, but to hold any throw until he gave explicit word. He told me to record the hour and note wind direction, sea state, and any sounds. I wrote as rapidly as I could form legible letters. Near midnight, the water brightened in a wide, circular ring as though countless small bioluminescent organisms flashed simultaneously. The ring moved with steady speed and crossed our projected path. The ship's bow met it and passed through. As we crossed this luminous boundary, the knocking came again, but lighter this time, exploratory rather than aggressive. Then directly ahead, something broke the surface just beyond the starboard beam. It was wide and blunt with the mouth closed. The upper jaw displayed a line of small pits or sensory organs. The eye was set far to the side and looked forward only marginally. It watched our hull for one long, terrible breath, then sank without creating a splash. The bioluminescence ran along its back for a brief moment and then extinguished. No one spoke. Owen lifted his harpoon and then lowered it again slowly. "Not that way," he stated in a low voice. "We cannot strike something that creates such swells with a mere hand weapon." Parson Whitlow began a prayer under his breath. He cut it short when the captain looked at him and gave a small shake of his head. The men needed their hearing unobstructed. The captain ordered complete silence and nothing more. He stood beside the helm with Willis and kept one hand upon the tiller bar. His other hand went once to his troublesome back and remained there for a moment. I observed this gesture and then looked away deliberately. It was a private pain he bore. The ship maintained a slow southwesterly heading, held almost entirely by the trim of the sails. The helm now provided minimal assistance. Before dawn, Sutter rigged a safety line and went beneath the stern with a tool bag secured to his chest. We held a rope taut and ready. He remained submerged long enough for my throat to constrict with anxiety, then surfaced and spat seawater. Lower pintle twisted, he reported, breathing hard. Rudder face scored deeply. No break, but he drew another breath. It is grinding a deliberate groove. It knows that vulnerable location. He did not explain how he reached this conclusion, but his certainty carried more terror than mere speculation. The captain ordered a drogue streamed astern of the rudder to draw water past it and keep it braced in position. We paid out two small casts with webbing between them and a long line. The stern steadied marginally. We attempted a different test at first light. Owen constructed a bundle of spare rope and wrapped it around a spar end to create a bumpkin projection. He fixed two large iron hooks to it facing rearward. He lowered this contraption off the starboard quarter on a chain, so it hung approximately 1 fathom beneath the surface. If the creature rammed this position, it would take iron into its hide. He stood with the chain gripped firmly and watched the water with absolute focus. The sea remained level and still. The bioluminescent glow faded as the sun rose behind persistent cloud cover. For a brief period, I dare to hope we had witnessed the worst. Then the water to port swelled in a long, sustained rise. The ship tilted toward it. A back broke the surface. It was not a rolling motion like a whale's. It rose straight upward for a considerable span and fell back, revealing a width that exceeded our vessel's length. The skin appeared scarred in irregular patches. I saw two round pits set far apart. They were not eyes. They were old wounds that had healed to deep depressions. The tail came last, a heavy wedge that moved once and set the sea running toward us in a surge. When the back submerged, the bumpkin chain jerked violently. Owen braced his feet and held firm. The chain groaned under extreme tension and then went slack suddenly. He hauled it in rapidly. Both hooks were torn completely away. The wooden spar had split lengthwise. He set the damaged stump upon the deck and stared at it without speaking a word. Hargreaves stated in a clear, steady voice, "We must change our water." He pointed again to the chart, indicating a position farther south and west. If we maintain this heading, we may cross into a current of cooler water. The captain looked at the listless sails and then at our wake. "We shall make the attempt," he agreed. He ordered what canvas we could reasonably carry and minute adjustments to our angle. We managed to coax slightly more speed from the vessel. The men moved with extraordinary care, as though each footfall might provoke the creature or summon it back. The subsequent strike did not target the wooden structure. It came from beneath the bow and lifted us bodily. The forefoot cleared the water entirely for a moment. The hull slammed down, and the deck seams creaked ominously. A barrel in the hold shifted and thumped loudly. Sutter went below to secure it with chocks and returned with perspiration on his face despite the mild air temperature. "If it splits the stem timber," he said to me quietly enough that only I heard, "we shall pump until our arms fail utterly, and then we shall cease pumping and sink." I nodded, because any verbal response would have revealed more fear than I wished to display. By late morning, Ned could stand upon his injured leg. He requested to take his watch merely to feel useful. The captain permitted him to hold a line near the foremast and instructed him to speak immediately if he felt the deck shift or jump. Ned gave one short nod and did precisely as ordered. He did not look over the side again. Toward noon, we sighted fish for the first time in days. A small school of mackerel or similar species flashed ahead of the bow. They did not scatter and dart in their usual manner. They moved in a tightly compressed cluster and remained near the surface as though compressed from below by some pursuing threat. The cluster cut across our path and vanished to starboard. Moments later, the water ahead darkened considerably. The ship ran into an oil slick that spread farther than I could see in either direction. It smelled powerfully of rendered fat and decomposing meat. Globules of yellowish oil clung to the bow and slid back along the planking. The deck grew treacherously slippery. Ned fetched Sind once more and worked it underfoot methodically. He did not complain or ask questions. He labored as though each sweep might appease something he could not name, but deeply feared. In the center of that extensive slick, a shape rose and turned onto its side deliberately. The head appeared again, wider now in the clearer daylight. The mouth opened perhaps a hand's breadth. Rows of teeth showed inside, not needle-like as in most fish, but broad and triangular, set in multiple ranks. The mouth closed, and the head sank slowly. I had seen sharks captured off Madeira on a previous voyage. This mouth exceeded any of those by proportions I could not calculate. My stomach turned, not at any gore, but at the sheer, impossible scale. Hargreaves drew a deep breath and released it slowly. "We measure our world incorrectly," he stated, almost to himself. Then he closed his mouth abruptly, as though he had revealed more than he intended. The captain made a difficult decision. He ordered powder and shot brought topside. We carried 2 small swivel guns and a modest quantity of iron balls because the merchant company anticipated no naval combat at sea. He instructed Willis and Owen to load them regardless. "If it surfaces near enough," he stated, "we shall give it metal." Owen checked the touch holes and priming powder. He positioned one piece in the bow and one at the stern. The crew moved with disciplined focus now. Fear had transformed into a list of specific tasks. I maintained the ship's log and then set down the quill for a moment and leaned my hands upon the lid of the instrument chest. I thought briefly of harbors and white chalk cliffs and the sound of carts upon cobblestone streets. I permitted myself that thought and then deliberately set it aside. We were not near any of those civilized places. We were here with a hull of oak planking, 2 small artillery pieces, harpoons, lines, and a creature that had taken iron without apparent concern. The only path was forward into whatever the sea and the day would bring. I closed the instrument chest and stood upright. The captain raised his hand for silence. He looked from face to face deliberately. He did not deliver a speech. He simply pointed to the bow and then to the stern. "Watch closely," he commanded, "and do not waste a shot." Before we fired any projectile, the sea surrounding us went utterly calm once more. There was no wave motion, no wind, no cross-current or surface disturbance whatsoever. It appeared as though the surface had frozen solid, yet it remained liquid water. The captain stepped toward the bow gun and leaned one hand against the bulwark. He He watched the slick surrounding us, and his eyes narrowed, not in panic, but in careful calculation. Owen remained at the stern gun and kept both hands positioned on the firing grips. He breathed slowly through his nose in that controlled manner men employ when they have already accepted pain in advance and are merely waiting for it to arrive. Parson Whitlow moved toward young Ned and positioned himself beside the boy. They did not speak. Ned held a line in his hands, though the rope was not secured to anything at that moment. He simply needed something solid to grip. His hands trembled once, then steadied. The boy was frightened beyond measure, but he had not lost control of himself. Surgeon Bull knelt and checked the lashings of his bandages unnecessarily, even though they required no adjustment. His hands needed occupation, or they would begin trembling. Hargreaves took another latitude sight, despite the fact it was utterly pointless given the cloud cover. Every man was clinging to some action because standing motionless and waiting for that creature to select its moment felt worse than anything it could actually do to us. The sound that came next was not a knock or impact. It was a slow, grinding noise beneath the keel, trailing from bow to stern. The timbers vibrated through our boot soles. It felt like a deliberate drag of heavy bone scraping across oak. Sutter gripped the rail and closed his eyes. "It is measuring us," he stated quietly. I do not believe he meant to speak it aloud. I cannot explain how he reached that conclusion, but the instant he articulated it, every man aboard knew instinctively that he was correct. The grinding ceased at the stern. Owen tightened his jaw and readied the gun for firing. The head did not rise first. The tail came up from the water in a steep arc, only a portion of it visible, but sufficient to comprehend the scale in full daylight. The surface broke around it, and I saw the scars again, old and deep and healed over. It swung downward out of sight. The back rose next, higher than previously, directly off the stern where Owen's gun was already aimed. It remained there long enough for every man aboard to observe that the scars were not singular injuries. They were layered accumulations from years of existence. Something had fought this creature many times and failed repeatedly to kill it. The captain whispered, almost without intending to vocalize it, "God preserve us." Owen waited until the massive shape began to turn, exposing more of its flank. Then he fired. The shot struck slightly aft of the centerline of that enormous head. A plume of water and black powder smoke erupted skyward. The echo rolled long and flat across the motionless sea. The back vanished instantly beneath the surface. The stern dipped down sharply. The rudder jerked so violently that the tiller rope snapped completely and lashed across the deck like a whip. Willis barely evaded it and fell sideways against the taffrail. He struck his ribs hard and gasped for breath, but remained conscious and functional. The creature struck beneath the hull with devastating force. It hit us off-center to starboard, approximately midships. Every man grabbed whatever he could reach. The blow nearly capsized us. We heeled so far that the lee rail dipped beneath the water. Seawater washed across the entire deck. The bow swung violently off course. Barrels broke loose from their lashings. Surgeon Bull was thrown onto his hands and knees and slid 3 feet before arresting himself against a cleat. The sound of that impact transmitted through ribs and skull more than through the ears. It was a pressure wave. My chest felt concussed from within. When the hull righted itself, the sea remained still again. No current, no wind, only the faint ring of bioluminescent specks dispersing where the hull rocked slightly in place. The ship barely advanced at all. Owen kept staring at the wake where the thing had vanished. His hands still gripped the gun, though he had already discharged it. His knuckles showed white with tension. He did not release his grip until the captain explicitly told him to stand down and reload. Whilst Owen and Willis reset the gun, Sutter and Hargreaves crawled to the starboard rail to assess the damage beneath the waterline. Sutter used a sounding pole lowered against the outer planking. He tapped methodically and listened to the resonance. The third plank below the midline rang with a dull, ominous tone. "Crushed grain there," he reported. "Not breached completely, but severely weakened." The captain nodded once. We must not endure another strike of that magnitude. His voice remained flat, but there was no distance or detachment in his eyes any longer. He felt the mortal danger now precisely as the rest of us did. We maintained our course with what minimal forward motion we still possessed. The sea continued to smell of metal and decomposing meat. The air above the deck felt warmer than before, though not dramatically so. There was no wind whatsoever. It was as though the ocean surrounding us had become a sealed chamber with no exchange of air. Young Ned asked the captain quietly, "What does it want from us?" The captain answered with complete honesty, "I believe it is curious initially, and now it is enraged." Ned swallowed hard and continued gripping the line tightly. Near midday, a dorsal fin rose ahead of us. Not the creature's fin, a smaller one, black and thin. Then another appeared. Sharks, perhaps 4 or 5 individuals. They moved erratically, then suddenly fled as though forcibly driven from beneath. The water bulged upward, but nothing showed itself. The sharks fled with the same panic a horse displays fleeing a fire. They did not return. The creature surfaced directly ahead, dead in our path. The mouth opened wide this time, fully extended. It was utterly silent. The rows of teeth were clean and unbroken, gleaming white. It did not move toward us aggressively or with speed. It hovered in the water with only its head above the surface. The size of that mouth in direct proportion to our bow was something no man on earth would credit if he had not stood precisely where we stood. If it lunged forward even half its own body length, it could have sheared off the bow and crushed half the crew before we could react in any meaningful way. Hargreaves said to the captain in a low voice, "We cannot outrun this creature. There is no wind." The captain nodded, but did not remove his eyes from the apparition before us. Then the thing closed its mouth slowly and sank straight downward. It descended without creating a ripple. It sank as though it had decided to contemplate the situation further. For the first time throughout the entire voyage, the crew spoke openly without seeking permission. Why would it cease attacking? Willis asked. Owen stated grimly, "It is strategizing about how to take the ship whole." The parson said nothing whatsoever. His hands clamped around the tiny Bible packet like a vice grip. He did not open it, but neither did he put it away. The captain looked at each man in turn. We do not fracture or panic. We prepare further. We set traps. We make this ship taste of iron everywhere. He turned to Sutter. "Fetch every spare hook and nail we possess." To Surgeon Bull, "Bandages ready. Tourniquets ready." To Hargreaves, "Chart a direct southwesterly bearing toward colder water. If we locate cooler seas, perhaps it will abandon us." He turned to Owen last. "If it surfaces again within harpoon reach, strike without hesitation. We have no second opportunities." Owen nodded once. The nod was slow and carried absolute commitment. I went below to inspect the bilges once more. The keel seam we had been monitoring was holding adequately, but there was a new stress crack along a frame joint 3 timbers forward. It was not leaking yet, but it would certainly leak if the hull sustained another strike in that location. I closed the hatch and stood motionless for a moment in the dim hold. I felt the coldness in my gut that comes when a man knows the mathematics are turning decisively against him. That creature was not finished with us. It was only beginning its true examination. When I returned topside, the sea still lay smooth as polished stone. The captain ordered one final attempt to bait it into a wounding before nightfall, but this time the bait would incorporate forged metal that would not simply break away or be discarded. We prepared the trap in complete silence, each man understanding his role without need for explanation. Before we lowered our constructed trap, the captain ensured every man understood the plan completely. We would suspend 2 linked anchors from the starboard quarter, positioned 3 fathoms down, lashed a chain rather than rope. Between the anchors, we fixed a cage constructed of interlocked iron scrap, nails, spikes, hooks, and the broken gun cask hoops we had split flat and sharpened. Inside that cage, we secured a full barrel of salt beef as bait. If the creature tore into it, there existed no possibility for it to bite without taking iron through its mouth or jaw. and if it became entangled, the anchors would drag against our hull and slow it sufficiently for Owen to strike at the head with a harpoon or for the stern gun to deliver a shot directly into its skull at point-blank range. Not a single man argued or questioned the plan. We all desperately wanted one clean blow that would injure it significantly. We needed to demonstrate that we were not merely prey to be consumed at leisure. We moved as one coordinated unit and lowered the trap slowly and carefully. The chain rattled straight down into the dark water. When the slack eased and the anchors took the weight, the barrel sat suspended beneath the surface. The captain did not want it drifting at great depth. He wanted it positioned low enough that the creature would have to expose itself clearly in order to strike at it. As soon as the final length of chain was secured to the bit, we waited. The air felt oppressively heavy. The water remained flat as glass. Even the absent birds seemed more conspicuous now. Ned sat on the deck with his back against the mainmast. His right hand held his rope again, but his left rested lightly on his bandaged calf. He was pale, but not withdrawn or detached. His eyes remained sharp and alert. There was a quiet resignation in him that had not existed days earlier. The boy who had chased rats enthusiastically with rope was gone entirely. Something older and harder now occupied his place. Surgeon Bull remained kneeling beside his medical satchel. His face looked drained of color, but he was prepared for whatever horror came next. Parson Whitlow leaned near the rail, watching the smooth water intently, but he never released his Bible packet from his grip. Hargreaves kept the chart spread open against the mast support. He had identified a path that, if wind returned, would take us across a line of ocean current where water should be significantly cooler. His finger tapped that line once every few minutes, as if reassuring himself that rational navigation still mattered in a place where reason itself barely applied. The captain stood near the trap chain with his hand on a belaying pin. He stared at the place where the barrel hung, suspended below, as though he could perceive it through the water itself. When this commences, the captain said to all of us quietly, "There will be no orders except one: strike and reload. Nothing else matters." We all nodded understanding. No one spoke again. The first indication came from deep below the bow, a faint hum that vibrated the hull structure. Not organic sound, but pressure sound. The hum rose slowly in pitch and then stopped abruptly. The smell changed in the air again, growing stronger and sharper, more acrid. Then a column of water rose beneath us. The surface bulged and lifted the hull bodily, not like a swell distributed across a wide area. This lifted from directly beneath us in a concentrated point. The creature was testing upward pressure against the keel. The keel was forced upward several inches and then dropped again suddenly. The hull slapped the water flat with a tremendous sound. The captain displayed no reaction. He only waited for the genuine strike. The second sign came from the trap chain. The chain links rattled once lightly, not enough to displace the anchors, merely sufficient to inform us that something had brushed against it. Ned whispered without realizing he spoke aloud. "It knows every inch of our hull now. It has mapped us completely." The chain rattled again, harder this time. The hull trembled throughout its length. The chain groaned and stretched taut like a bowstring under extreme tension. We looked over the starboard quarter, hearts pounding. 2 fathoms down, the water brightened as the bioluminescence was displaced by massive movement below. It was moving directly toward the trap with purpose. Owen raised his harpoon to ready position. Willis primed the stern gun carefully. The captain clenched the belaying pin hard enough that his knuckles turned bone white. A massive dark shape rose with startling speed and rammed the anchors and the barrel in one violent lunge. The chain snapped taut so violently that the wooden bit cracked audibly. The hull jerked sideways with tremendous force. The barrel splintered instantly in a violent churn of water and flashing bioluminescent light. We could see metal glinting in the churning sea below as the scrap cage twisted and deformed. The creature shook the entire trap assembly and then surged beneath the hull. The chain ripped 3 feet downward then snapped back with such violence that the deck creaked ominously under the strain. A deep roar of pressure sounded from below, not audible through air, but transmitted through bone and tissue. Every man felt it resonate in his chest cavity. The creature was attempting to wrench the anchors free completely. If it succeeded, it would drag the chain and use it as leverage to break the hull open. "Hold that chain," the captain shouted. For men threw their full weight onto the tackle. The chain tore skin from Sutter's already injured palms, but he maintained his grip through sheer will. The anchors held their position. The scrap cage held together. Something was definitely caught or impaled. The creature thrashed once, twice, 3 times. The hull heeled over so sharply that water washed over half the starboard deck in a flood. Ned skidded and almost lost his grip on the mast, but Parson Whitlow grabbed his shoulder and anchored him firmly in place. Owen was already moving before the next violent shake. He knelt at the rail and leaned far out, harpoon held forward, waiting for the precise moment the head would breach close enough for a killing strike. A third violent heave came from beneath, more desperate this time. The chain slackened momentarily, then jerked taut again with brutal force. The beast attempted to roll its body, trying to dislodge whatever had caught it. The anchor scraped along beneath us. The metal grinding sound was unbearable, setting teeth on edge. Sutter screamed through clenched teeth as the chain tore at his hands again, leaving raw, bleeding wounds. Then the head rose. It burst upward half out of the water, fully 2 arm spans off the starboard rail, jaws half open in rage, mouth massive enough to engulf half the ship in a single bite. Owen did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. He lunged downward with all his strength and drove the harpoon deep just behind the right eye. The iron penetrated into the eye socket itself. The wooden handle shook violently in his grip from the impact. Blood burst outward in a thick, dark sheet that stained the water black. The creature shook its massive head once, and the iron shaft bent sideways but did not tear free of the wound. The beast produced a roar underwater that seemed impossible. The entire sea vibrated with the sound, transmitting through water and wood and bone. The creature crashed down and vanished beneath the surface. The chain ripped downward again and nearly pulled all 4 men off their feet and over the side. But then something fundamental changed. The tension slackened suddenly. The chain went slack, hanging dead weight once more. The anchor sagged with no resistance. It had released itself. It had let go. The sea went still again, utterly motionless. Every man stood frozen in place, muscles tensed, waiting for a retaliatory strike of overwhelming violence. None came. For 1 long, full minute, there was no sound at all besides the shallow breathing of exhausted, terrified men. Then a large, spreading cloud of dark blood appeared far off the starboard bow, perhaps 50 yards distant. The bioluminescent glow in the water flickered inside that cloud, then thinned gradually, then faded to nothing. Hargreaves whispered hoarsely, "We have wounded it significantly. It retreats." Owen remained kneeling at the rail, staring down at the water where his harpoon had vanished with the beast. His hands shook now, not with fear, but with delayed shock and the aftermath of extreme physical force. We waited 5 more minutes without any movement or sound from below. When nothing returned to threaten us, the captain finally exhaled deeply and stepped back from his position. "We mend what we can," he stated firmly. "We hold this course. If the wind returns, we run with all speed for colder water. If it returns to us, we finish what we have started." He turned to young Ned. "Boy, fetch sand. Clean this blood from the deck immediately." Ned nodded and set to work without hesitation. No delay, no complaint. His face was grim, but steady and determined. I took up the logbook and wrote the hour and the details as accurately as I could. Owen remained kneeling without moving for a long time. Parson Whitlow placed a hand on his shoulder briefly in silent acknowledgement. Owen did not look up. He was not in shock, not precisely. He was processing the reality that he had driven iron into something that every earlier age would have declared utterly impossible. Night came slowly and reluctantly. Still no wind stirred. The sea remained unnaturally smooth, but that feeling of immense pressure beneath the hull had vanished completely. We waited for darkness and whatever horrors it might bring with it. When night finally fell, the sky remained covered with cloud, though thinner than previously. We could see faint starlight bleeding through in scattered patches, but no moon showed itself. The water lost all bioluminescent glow. The slicks surrounding us dispersed slowly. The blood cloud in the distance had drifted farther off to the east. The sea returned to being merely heavy and flat. No wind to speak of, but no supernatural stillness either. The captain did not dismiss any watches or reduce our vigilance. He made everyone rotate in pairs so no man would be isolated at any post. He told me to continue riding, but to remain at the mainmast with the others where I could be seen and assisted if needed. Surgeon Bull set lanterns burning low and shielded on the deck, so we would maintain night vision for watching the surrounding water. Owen sat near the stern gun with fresh powder and shot already measured and prepared. He had not spoken since delivering the strike. His face was blank but intensely focused. The parson prayed silently now, without moving his lips or speaking aloud. Hargreaves sat beside him and stared into the dark water, not with fear any longer, but with a tired, philosophical acceptance of whatever fate would bring. We waited in tense half-silence for hours. The ship settled into a new rhythm, not of normal sailing, but of cautious, guarded expectation. Every creak from the hull made men flinch slightly, then steady themselves again when nothing followed. Sutter wrapped his palms and fingers carefully in strips of clean canvas, but the raw, bleeding skin still showed through in places. Surgeon Bull cleaned the wounds on his hands with vinegar despite Sutter's cursing and attempts to pull back. If you permit it to fester and become infected, you die for nothing, Bull stated flatly. Sutter nodded acceptance and kept still through the burning pain. Around what felt like midnight, a slight wind stirred over the deck for the first time in days. It was not sufficient to fill sails properly, but enough to break the oppressive heat and stagnant pressure in the air. Every man noticed it simultaneously. We looked up at the rigging, each silently hoping for a shift that would allow us to move again with purpose. Secure braces for when the wind strengthens sufficiently, the captain said quietly. He did not want to break the tension with loud orders. He spoke as though the creature might still hear us and be summoned back by incautious noise. Ned stood and moved to assist Owen at the stern. His injured leg held his weight adequately. He worked more slowly than usual, but with steady coordination and focus. That steadiness mattered more than speed now. Ned had matured in the last day more than any youth that age should have to. He listened more attentively. He watched everyone carefully. His fear had settled and compressed into something resembling sharpened discipline. There was no trace of shock or denial remaining in him. A faint ripple broke the surface far out to port. Not large, merely a disturbance in the otherwise smooth water. We all saw it clearly. We waited tensely. A second small ripple drifted near the first. Then nothing followed for several minutes. Willis looked at me and whispered cautiously, "Could be whales again, return now that it has departed." I did not answer. None of us wanted to assume anything was harmless any longer. Nothing approached for another hour. Men began to breathe slightly easier, though shoulders remained tense. But the captain did not lower our guard or reduce vigilance. "It will return if it intends to finish us," he stated. "We do not ease our watch until wind sets us moving at speed." Near the end of the second watch, I observed faint current movement towards starboard, actual water movement rather than the dead stillness we had endured. The slick had cleared fully now, and the water appeared darker, more natural. The temperature at the surface felt noticeably cooler when I dipped a bucket and tested the water by hand. I reported this to the captain immediately. Hargreaves confirmed my observation with his own test. The current is definitely shifting direction. If we could catch even minimal wind, we might drift toward colder water sooner than our calculations predicted. The captain gave a single, curt nod. "Remain ready," he said to all of us. "This change is either our escape beginning, or the trap tightening around us with finality. The creature returned shortly after that pronouncement, as though summoned by the very mention of it. The return came without sound or warning of any kind. Its strike landed at the stern post again, but noticeably weaker and incomplete compared to earlier attacks. It was more of a testing shove than a full ramming assault, as if checking whether we still braced ourselves defensively, as if determining whether we believed it had departed permanently. Owen had been waiting precisely for such a test. The instant that shove impacted the stern, he swung the loaded gun toward the disturbance and fired without waiting for a full breach or clear target. The shot struck just beneath the surface. There was a burst of water that shot far higher into the air than the small cannon should have created on its own. We all heard something substantial impact underwater, then a low grinding movement followed by deeper displacement of massive volume. The crew braced themselves again in disciplined silence. The creature did not strike back immediately with violence. Instead, it circled us slowly. We felt the pressure rise again beneath the hull as it passed below our keel, but it remained deeper this time, more cautious. It was weakened. We could tell by the altered tone of its pressure, sound, and movement. The wound had extracted something vital from it. After 5 long, slow passes beneath our hull, the creature finally showed itself again, but not by rising to attack. It surfaced far from the ship this time, perhaps 500 yards to the west. We saw its back clearly, not gliding toward us with intent, but moving at a steady departure angle. It was leaving the area. The scar we had created behind the eye was visible even from this distance, an open, fresh gash across pale cartilage and hardened skin that wept dark blood. It had no interest now in rushing us again. It was conserving its remaining strength for survival. It sank slowly without any final gesture or threat display. Owen stared fixedly at the spot where it vanished beneath the surface. He lowered his hands from the gun and exhaled once, long and slow. Parson Whitlow closed both hands around his Bible packet and bowed his head in silent, fervent thanks to Providence. The captain remained standing perfectly still, watching the silent, dark water long after the creature had departed. He did not release his grip on that belaying pin until he was absolutely certain no sudden reversal or final attack would come. When he finally stepped away from his post, we all understood without words that the immediate mortal danger had ended. At dawn the following morning, wind returned at last, not hard or violent, but steady and blessedly cold. The sea gained small waves again, normal and natural. The foul smell eased and then disappeared entirely. The surface ripple finally returned to its accustomed state. The water temperature continued dropping steadily as we approached the demarcation line Hargreaves had marked on his chart. The crew worked the sails without requiring commands. They all understood instinctively that speed now mattered more than rest or recovery. By midday, the Mercy was moving at 4 full knots on a southwesterly heading. It felt as though we were being permitted to leave, granted passage by something that could have destroyed us utterly, but had chosen not to. That night, the creature did not return. The next day, the metallic smell was gone completely. The porpoises returned and ran alongside our bow once more, leaping joyfully. A small gull circled us at noon, the first bird we had seen in over a week. The sea looked like any other ordinary sea. Clean current, fresh wind, normal wave patterns. We had crossed into another region of water entirely, left that haunted place behind. We made landfall weeks later in Plymouth Harbor. The captain wrote a formal, detailed report for the harbor master and merchant company officials. They read it and dismissed half the contents as exaggeration or misunderstanding. They concluded we had encountered an unusually large whale. They suggested we had panicked during an extended calm. They noted that sharks sometimes drift when injured and leave odd marks on ships. They believed only the portions of our account that could be made smaller, more explicable, less threatening to their understanding of the natural world. But every man aboard that voyage signed the identical technical entries in the official ship's log. We measured precisely what we observed. We measured and preserved the tooth fragment. We measured the bite groove on the cask wood with mathematical precision. We described the mouth's dimensions exactly. We wrote only verifiable fact, nothing embellished. Men in taverns laughed at portions of the story when we told it quietly over ale. But each man aboard the Mercy knew, with absolute certainty, there was no exaggeration whatsoever. It happened exactly as logged in the official record. Some years later, another long-toothed fragment from a different location turned up in someone's private cabinet of curiosities, and scholars began discussing once more the ancient giant sharks that lived in prehistoric times and supposedly died out with ancient seas millions of years ago. They stated confidently that such creatures lived long before any human walked upon the earth. That was the beginning of natural philosophers using a different word for these creatures, Megalodon. We did not know that word at sea then, during our voyage, but we knew with absolute certainty what had hunted us with intelligence and purpose. I never saw anything remotely similar again in my lifetime of subsequent voyages. Young Ned grew into a capable man and served on several ships after the Mercy before eventually moving inland to raise a family in safety. Owen Price stayed at sea, but never hunted large marine life again. He stated that once a man has struck iron into something that should not exist according to all natural philosophy, he never again attempts to prove himself against beasts. Hargreaves continued making charts for the merchant companies and never spoke publicly about the event again. But in private conversation, he told me he never doubted the accuracy of our log a single day for the remainder of his life. The captain lived many more years and managed his chronic back pain until it never prevented him from sea duty again. On his last day alive, I visited him at his home. I asked him directly if he ever believed we were one moment away from being swallowed whole that night. He considered the question carefully and said, "Not one moment, many moments." Repeatedly. And then he said that he believed with certainty the only reason we survived was because we fought back with every resource we possessed. He instructed me to ensure the ship's log was never altered or edited merely to gain credibility or belief from skeptics. I never altered a single word. This account stands as written in the original log, preserved now in the Plymouth Maritime Archives. What we encountered was real. It existed, and somewhere in the deep ocean, perhaps it exists still.